Welcome to America Reads. On today's activity, we are focusing on math, and today's standard is use place value understanding to round whole numbers to the nearest tenth or 100th. Let's get started.
So when rounding, there's always one rule that you really want to keep in your little head and never forget, because when trying to round, this is what's really going to help you remember it. So the saying is 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So this basically means that if your number is 5 or bigger, you're going to round up. And if your number is 4 or less, you're going to let it rest, which means that you are going to leave it alone. You are not going to do anything to it. It stays the same. So now here I have this number that we're going to practice with, but I'm actually going to keep this here just so that we don't forget and we can use it as reference and we can look back to it. So here we have 647, and we are going to round to the 10th place, which I labeled here, and we're also going to round to the 100th place, which I also labeled here. And we're going to write our answers right next to that. So first, we're being asked to round to the 10th place. So we can see that this number here, 47, starts with a 4, which means that 4 or less, we're going to let it rest. So when rounding to the 10th, our number is actually going to stay the same. We're not going to do anything to it. Now, when rounding to the 100th, what we're going to do is we're now going to look at this number right here. We're actually going to look at the entire number. So if this number were to be 5 or more, we would raise the score and this would round all the way to 700. But since the number here is 4, we're actually going to let it rest, right? So our number would stay as 647. But now we're actually going to go ahead and try a bigger number so that we can actually learn how to round up. So I'm going to keep this one here so that we can look back to it. And now we have this number, 656. Of course, these are all big numbers. It just makes it easier for us to round them. So I'm going to label my 10th place. And I'm going to label my 100th place right here. And then I'm going to do my little lines just so that we can write our answers right next to that. So if we're looking at our 10th place here, we see that this is a 5, which means that 5 or more, raise the score up to 660, because when rounding to the 10th power, we're not really paying much attention to this number right here. We're only paying attention to these two numbers. So 56 would round up to 60. Now, when rounding 656 to the 100th place, now we're actually going to pay attention to this number here. So we're taking into account all three numbers. And now we're really just mostly going to pay attention to this one and this one, only because this one is going to tell us how we are going to round. So again, 5 equals 5 or more, raise the score, which means that we are going to raise the score. But instead of raising the score here, we're going to raise the score here. So then what number is after 6? 7, which means that when rounding to the 100th power, we would get 700. Now for our last example, we have this really, really big number, which is 885. So again, keep in mind our rule, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. I love it because it rhymes and sometimes it's really easy to remember. So we're gonna round to our 10th place again, so I'm gonna write it down below here so that we don't forget where our 10th place and our 100th place is. So here we have 10 and 100. So, and again, my little line here so that I can write my answer right next to it. And so when rounding to the 10th place, remember that we're paying attention to this number right here, but mostly this number because this is what's going to tell us how we are rounding. And since 8 is actually bigger than 5, that means that we are going to raise the score. So when rounding to the 10th place, this would actually give us 890, right? We're only changing these last two numbers because this tells us our 10th place. So now when looking at our 100th place, now we're going to pay attention to this number 2 and this number 2. You notice that when rounding, we don't really pay attention to the last number. It's really not important. I mean, it is important, but not as much as these two. So we really don't pay attention to this little guy over here. So when rounding to the 100th place, we see that 8 lands on 5 or more, which means that we are going to raise the score. So this would round to 900 because that is the next number, right? So what comes after 8, 9, which means that we would round this up to 900.
Thank you so much for learning with me today. I hope you come back soon and learn some more with me. Please comment if you have any questions, like and subscribe to our channel, and we'll be back with tons of new fun activities.